Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar on preparing for AI. Before we start, we're very delighted to have a special guest, none other than Peter Zemsky, Deputy Dean. Welcome, Peter.
Hello everyone, glad to be coming to you live from Fontainebleau, France. This webinar, in addition to great content, has double significance. As you may remember, we were celebrating 6 headline webinars for our 60th anniversary. This is the last one of those. And here on July 1st, we're our summer with this webinar. Based on your feedback, we've organized our summer learning festival around 3 topics. One, that this one falls in, tech innovation and entrepreneurship. Also, we have a set of webinars and other events on business and society, kicking off with Paul Pullman. And finally, many more on personal and career development in these interesting times. So we'll be doing that. Next slide, please. Check your mailboxes. You'll see information on all these different tracks. Here you can see the follow-ups on tech innovation and entrepreneurship. Please dip in liberally and get stimulated, because at the end of this, we're going to go quiet for a while. We're going to rest up in August and early September and be coming back to you with more lifelong learning. Back to you, Neil.
Thank you so much, Peter. Okay, let me introduce the panel. My name is Neil Cortis. I'm an MBA from 2007. But we have this amazing panel for you, and let me introduce. First of all, Professor Theodoros Evgeniou, who is Professor of Decision Sciences and Technology Management at INSEAD, and has been working on AI issues for 20 years and publishing a huge number of papers. Welcome, Theos.
Thank you, Neil.
Next, Carsten Wildberger, who is the COO and member of the Board of Management at E.ON, and also an INSEAD MBA from 2000 and a Doctor of Theoretical Physics, in fact, as well. Welcome, Carsten.
Hi, Neil. Hi, everyone.
And finally, Kay Butterworth. Kay is a barrister and part-time judge in the UK, a professor of law and head of artificial intelligence and machine learning at the World Economic Forum. So with a huge range of view of what's happening with all the important members of that forum. Welcome, Kay.
Actually, Kay Firth Butterfield, but I don't mind.
I'm so sorry. I do apologise. Well, there we go. Please ask questions. I will pass them on. Let me move on to the agenda. The plan is to get 3 different points of view and then move more to questions. And we're going to start with Carsten Wildberger. Now, some uses of AI are kind of small scale, like chatbots, and some are have massive potential. And Carsten, can you please talk us through what you've done at E.ON and the potential of what you've worked on?
Sure, my pleasure. So I'd like to give a bit of background, what the meaning of AI is in the energy industry, and also what we've done specifically at E.ON. If we move to the next chart, just to set the context a little bit. There are, in essence, 3 drivers of the energy world. There's first and foremost, clearly climate change. Let me really point out this is real. And we have society that is also very active in this space, and I think it's highly needed. And then we have a lot of technological change for the last decades, and that is actually also driving the whole change of that energy system. If we move to the next chart, to think about the energy system, it's a general purpose infrastructure, and usually one distinguishes 3 general purpose infrastructure. You have communication, like telecommunications networks, so that all humans can actually connect, exchange information, data, etc. You have the mobility sector, that humans can exchange goods, and very importantly, the energy system is a general purpose infrastructure, because without energy, there is no Google. So it's the foundation of everything in human civilization. So in that sense, it's very foundational. And what happens is that those layers actually mingle now. We see a move into mobility, to electric cars. So energy is becoming a bit more mobile, and the same for communication. And what is very important, and that is my personal view, that data and artificial intelligence has a lot of general purpose technology aspects. So in this sense, there is a new emerging layer of that general nature. Let's move to the energy sector, specifically here what E.ON does. So the energy system that we are used to for the last 150 years was based on fossil fuel and nuclear power plants. So huge, massive power plants that produce electricity that was then transmitted through the wires through different voltage layers down to what the industry called metering points. So the industry didn't even know customers was a metering point. This system is a very linear pipe system, very rigid. And what happened in the last 25 years really with the emergence of wind and solar, so renewable energies, this linear system is getting dismantled and gets into smaller units, and it gets decentral. The world is getting more electric because of the renewables, and this system is much, much harder to actually manage and much more complex. And we at E.ON, we focus on two big areas. One is we are one of the largest worldwide operators of energy networks, especially distribution networks. This is where all the solar panels, the windmills, etc., are connected. So this is the foundation. And we serve more than 50 million customers across Europe with energy sales, with home solutions for customers, including heating, cooling, solar panels, batteries. We serve cities to make them cleaner, city quarters, heating, cooling, mobility services. So, and we are fully devoted in this transition to a cleaner, sustainable world. And this system that we operate, this decentral system, needs data. This system needs intelligence. Otherwise, it doesn't function, because you have millions of assets that produce energy. They need to communicate. You need to connect generation with consumption. So this is a highly complex adaptive system that only can function with intelligence. So we invest a lot in data in making our energy network smart, and we call it the internet of the energy transition. And to give you some specific examples, then I'll close with my little intro on the next page. The way we think about applying artificial intelligence is in different layers. The first one is, with artificial intelligence, we change the customer experience, how we interact with customers, how they interact with us. The second one is making resources, processes much more efficient. The third layer is, how can we steer energy production and consumption, which is dependent on the wind and the sun, much more efficient, and connect production and consumption? And how can we actually use AI to make the whole system, which is very complex because you have millions of assets now, in real time? How can we make this more resilient? And we are, of course, also looking for new business models that emerge out of AI. And very specifically, just the headlines, what does that mean? Let's take customer experience. So in the call centers during COVID time, we use natural language processing to analyze keywords of customers. What's the sentiment? What are customers worried about? And this gives us great insights how we can react and change our service. Or think about customers churning. So we analyze lots of different data, whatever we get from customers, and we are allowed to use to predict they are unhappy. How can we reach out to them proactively to prevent churn? And for instance, we change prices on a daily basis, let's say in Germany, for hundreds of postcodes, because competition is quite regional, and we optimize our positioning on the pricing websites. And this is a highly complex decision-making problem. On the process efficiency, we do AI-based network maintenance. So we collect with millions of sensors from the network which device can go down. When do we have to replace it? In the past, it was all experience-based on tables that a technician would use. Oh, this device is 20 years old. I go out there in the field and change it. So this is now much more real-time, insight-driven, improves availability, and of course lowers cost. And the last one is I want to give is, for instance, if we operate a city quarter, that is a building with thousands of people living there with small businesses, how do you operate such a system? So how do you take the heating, the cooling needs, you combine it with the temperature forecast outside, the algorithm learns about the building characteristics, the inertia of the building and to find the optimum temperature to operate the whole system, including when people are not in the room or the window is open. That all changes the energy system, and by just self-learning algorithms, you reduce the energy need by about 30%. So a few examples that I wanted to share, and that's it for now from me, Neil.
Can I ask one question, Carsten?
Sure.
How have you, some of those projects have an immediate impact on the bottom line, and some have a kind of a more diffuse, better experience for customers. How do you choose which to prioritize?
So in the beginning, so what you're saying is absolutely right. Actually, I would say a lot of projects are sometimes hard to measure immediately on the bottom line because they change more the way you run your business. And over time, it changes with data, with insights. You learn about the business and that changes. It's not always an immediate impact. So the project we picked first to convince people of the power of the data and the insights you generate was a problem that everyone thought we know everything about. So we are the experts. We know it all. We are the experts in churn management. And then you get the experts with the digital guys, and you have to work actually cross-functionally together. And then when people realize, oh gosh, I didn't know that. That's new to me, and I was the expert. Then people get curious. And that is the buy-in. So that was our first project, and it's often important to realize how little we know when we think we know everything. That's the project we picked.
Okay, chat room question, and then we must move on. But
yeah.
Someone asked, have you been able to take NLP, which I guess is natural language processing, beyond
Correct.
Sentiment analysis?
Yes. We clearly do this sometimes also in our interaction with the commands we have, for instance, field force. So we are testing this at the moment. This is not yet rolled out because it has to do with security. So for instance, when you operate in dangerous environments, how can you send a command to a machine without touching it because you're busy with other things, etc. So we're using processing, natural language processing, to actually manage machines or robots that you use. That's another example. So we're using this in various fields to actually interact as an interface with machines.
Excellent. Now let's hear a bit. This case study, we'll send a link to this case study because it's an absolutely fascinating read. It's a brilliant read. And maybe you could, Theos, talk a bit about talk maybe about the case study and what you draw from it.
Yeah, thanks, Neil, and thanks, Carsten and Kay also. The case study describes a little bit what Carsten said in terms of the role and value of data and AI and technology for the energy transformation. So we start from that kind of story. And then we go and discuss the journey of a company, of a large multinational like E.ON, in a relatively traditional sector, energy, how they transformed their, in a sense, culture and also processes, structure, and everything in many ways, the way the way they operate and decide using data and AI. So while there are lots of lessons in the case about the energy sector specifically, there are many, if not most, that apply to any organization that wishes to kind of start or develop their journey in this AI and data transformation. So we focus a lot on the lessons or experience from E.ON, which are many, and of course the case is everything. And here I just for the audience, I kind of picked up a few of them from the case and also the discussions from Kirsten. Yeah, sorry, from Kirsten here in this slide. I'm going to go with no particular order, but let me start from the last one, purpose. One thing that struck me the most, and I said this to Kirsten already a couple of times, I went in this case thinking about, okay, energy and AI. I'm not an energy expert. I've never worked on energy before. That was a few months ago. Getting into this, like energy and AI sounds like very interesting, but I don't know exactly how they fit together, right? I had no idea. And I came out convinced that I must work on energy and AI. And not all because of basically Kirsten describing the vision about how AI and technology and data, intelligent decision-making automatically can actually be used, for example, to orchestrate these millions of consumers and producers, which we can call prosumers actually, including people who have like electric cars that can be used for battery, for example, as an example, right? But everything else, people with solar panels or anything, right? How to orchestrate this using data and intelligent automatic decision-making. And me, myself, coming out of different experiences, I was thinking, oh wow, so I can see now how these ad tech kind of technologies that we're familiar with from 2003, 4, 5, or whatever, that uses AI to orchestrate online ads, why not use that to orchestrate and make efficient the energy consumption and production of the world, which can solve tons of problems. This is huge. This is the purpose. So this came out from a question we discussed with Carsten. How do you attract people to come and work for an energy company, instead of them going to, let's say, the Silicon Valley kind of big tech type of companies or a startup? In this sector, how do you attract AI talent in a company? And the answer is very simple: purpose. You have to give them a purpose. They are working on transforming the way we produce and consume energy in the future. And this is huge. So that's a key thing. This links, of course, to people. Going back to the first point, hiring the right people and attracting the right talent and retaining it. Purpose is important, but then you also have to consider training. So in Aeon, they did lots of kind of mini degrees, courses, and all those issues, but also culture. At the end of the day, it's about data-driven decision-making. I love a couple of points Carsten made about we are the expert, the humans, we are the experts in something. Okay, let's see what the data says. I'm going to read you a quote from the CEO of E.ON Germany from the case. The case is public, as Neil said, which I think says it all in many ways. This is a quote from Victoria Osantnik, from the CEO from E.ON Energy in Germany. If you look at reality based on data, it might be different from what people believe. We have to challenge beliefs to adopt AI. And this is really a transformation of civilization in many ways, right? Going from gut feeling kind of thing, and let's look at the data and let's use the data. So that's a little bit of a culture change. Of course, you have to build the momentum and start somewhere. So, for example, some criteria to consider is big ticket items that have short to market time, very low data challenges, because data challenge is the key challenge you jump into the moment you start. This is like a killer, basically. So you have to find big ticket items initially that can provide vision and kind of excitement to the organization, which have value and are fast to deliver. Data evangelization, I mean, the word evangelization sounds a little bit like ideological or something, but it's extremely important if it's done right. I mean, in a sense, we're kind of doing this also with these webinars, right? So in some way, if you think about this. But that's the way to transform a little bit also to create momentum and transform cultures. Of course, then you go to the usual suspects: data governance, data quality processes. I was quite impressed to see, like, at least in some parts of some markets of E.ON, every data type has a well-specific tag, metadata, indicating the owners of that data. That's shocking. It's like, oh, wow. So I can go and check about who is the owner of this data point. If I see an issue there, I can get in touch. That's really serious data quality management and governance processes. So that's important to set it in place. Then there's, of course, organizational structures, and so some centralized teams. E.ON brought in extra senior talent, the chief data officer from Telefonica, Juan, who has been instrumental in doing this case. I hope he's on the audience. And then built also decentralized units in different business units, right? And changing the business processes. There is a very old saying, generally about technology. It used to be about IT in general, but applies here, which goes a little bit like this. I always like repeating it. IT, or if you like, technology plus old organization. So if you just put technology in an old organization with no change, all it does, it creates an expensive old organization, which you have to avoid. New organization means processes, a new process design, organizational structures, everything, right? And then there is a little bit about the financing of this, right? So as you said correctly, I mean, how do you measure the value? And I have there in the slide this, in quotes, tyranny of numbers, to remind the audience and everybody that some of those things are not measurable. Because some of those, change of the culture towards data-driven decision-making, how do you measure that, right? The fact that you develop this, you implement this technology and this infrastructure that can create options for you in the future. How do you measure that? It's option valuation, but for unknown kind of possibilities. And of course, some of those things you can measure, and you have to go through the usual business case, and you have to have the resources for this. Interestingly, what was also interesting for the case of E.ON, which of course we see also in other organizations, that initially, from what I understand, and Kirsten, correct me later on if I'm wrong, there was sponsorship and protection at the beginning from the top. E.ON had people like Kirsten there, who are basically protecting, in a sense, and sponsoring this kind of journey at the beginning, because it takes some time to lift the weight. And during that time, you have to protect everything and make sure that things mature enough. Now they are moving towards something different, from what I understand. Having had this central sponsorship with kind of not necessarily too many questions asked about what's the business value in numbers, now they're moving towards a more hybrid place where basically the users, internal users, let's say internal customers of E.ON, they are paying for use cases with AI. So now it's going to be run also a little bit like a business in some sense internally, which is a usual maturity transformation. So you have to kind of do this transformation, but start from sponsorship at the beginning. So these are some of the topics, and again, we'll talk about some of those things later, like maybe skills or maybe organizational issues or business case. So I'll just stop here for now and come back later.
I have a question for Kay quickly. This idea of the importance of sponsorship at the beginning, is that something that you've seen in your work with the sponsorship from the board, sponsorship from the most senior leadership? Is that something you see as critical or not?
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons we did the board toolkit, because we actually found that very few board members understood AI very well. And so it's really difficult for them to carry out their oversight responsibilities, but also energize companies to use AI if they don't know anything about it. And the work that we're now doing on creating toolkits for each particular piece of the C-suite is also part of that education and desperately needed education around AI, its benefits and its pitfalls.
And question for Carsten, did you have to educate senior people, and is there some quick way to get people up to speed, maybe senior people?
Well, one person would never be enough, so I was clearly not the only one. I think we have several people at E.ON, also on the senior level, who embrace that. I have to say today, I'll call it a world-class AI team, digital team, that actually is paramount to it. And what is true is, especially in the beginning, any change needs leadership and needs sponsorship. And in large companies, that has to come from the top. So clearly the team has a lot of support, but because thanks to their great work, they've got so much buy-in in the organization that this is now much more natural. So if I just look at the breadth of topics they run today, we have a very structured program which is called digital.on, like E.on, E.ON. So digital.on, this is a well-known established program in the company where all parts of the business, including the finance function, are working together, using the experts regionally, centrally. So this is momentum that has been created over the years. But yes, it requires sponsorship from the top.
And I've got a chat room question for you, Theos. I'll just read it out. AI solutions are often end-to-end and integrated, so it's not easy to implement in organizations which are traditionally working in functional silos. How do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, not all of them, right? And there are some potentially visible and high-value solutions that can create momentum, starting from a very localized example. For example, Kirsten mentioned a few examples from E.ON. You work on preventive maintenance. It can be potentially relatively localized, although I don't know much about preventive maintenance myself. And that can be enough. Or there can be an example, again, I'll pick one from E.ON, but there are many others, where you can kind of use AI to optimize a very specific kind of, let's say, windmill operations or something, right? Or energy production operation from a specific source. And that can be enough to start. Now, of course, at some point, transformations require cross-organizational kind of capabilities. Of course, you need there to have some kind of centralized, again, the sponsorship from the top is necessary for that also, absolutely. And you have to have some kind of centralized teams which can also attract centralized talent, in addition to the localized kind of close to the business needs and understanding data skills, if you like. I don't want to use the term data science or AI, a combination of those in each of the business units in parallel. Obviously, some major projects require much more coordination, and that's typically one of the reasons why some of them fail. But that's a challenge in many ways. But it's not black and white.
Should we move on to your second slide, Theos?
Sure, unless you want. Well, as you wish. You are the master.
No.
Maybe move. I'd like to hear a bit more from Kay regarding. I mean, one of the things that I found very interesting in what you are doing, UK are doing in the World Economic Forum, and was what you published sometime in January or February, if I remember correctly, regarding the AI board toolkit, which I found it to be very interesting and very well thought out. And I haven't seen anything like this. I'm not aware of something like this. So I think it will be very useful to also talk about that, but we can talk about this also anytime, up to you.
Well, should we move to Kate? Let's move to talk. Let's move there, shall we?
Thank you.
Okay, give me a sec. Sorry. Or we kind of skipped this.
Oh yeah, sorry. Sure, skip this. Forgot about it.
So yeah, Kay, tell us about this incredible toolkit. It's a huge piece of work.
Absolutely, thank you, and thank you, Doris, for recommending it to people and being so kind in your comments. Let me start first by saying it is an absolute pleasure for me to hear about AI being used in conservation of electricity and energy, and so because I often find myself saying to people, why don't you think about using AI in this way, which doesn't bring up, for example, some of the problems, the ethical problems that we have in AI, and that I tend to spend my time working on. Because what we do at the World Economic Forum Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution Network is think about how do we put in governance, and I didn't say government, I said governance, around some of the what I would call the problems, or others might call the ethical issues around AI. So in my short time that I have with you, I think it's good to just sort of back up a little bit. And I wanted to start with the Davos Manifesto. So in 2020, this year at Davos, our chairman, Professor Schwab, issued the Davos Manifesto talking about stakeholder capitalism. And then shortly after, as we got into the COVID dispute, we started talking about what we call the Great Reset. So how does the world reset itself post-COVID? And I think that AI is an integral part of that. But let me just read you two, I think, important quotes for any business from Professor Schwab. The global health crisis has laid bare the unsustainability of our old system in terms of social cohesion, the lack of equal opportunities and inclusiveness. Nor can we turn our backs on the evils of racism and discrimination. We need to build into this new social contract our intergenerational responsibility to ensure that we live up to the expectations of young people. COVID has accelerated our transition into the age of the fourth industrial revolution. We have to make sure that the new technologies in digital, biological, and physical world remain human-centered and serve society as a whole, providing everyone with fair access. So that's really sort of helping us think about what we in Silicon Valley call slingshot to 2023. And that is that in the last 2 months or so, we have seen 2 years of explosion in some of these technologies. And Carsten talked about chatbots and NLP. I think that's a great example. So as we are using and becoming more familiar as human beings with chatbots, we're likely to be more ready to use chatbots. And so I know tomorrow you've got a conversation about the future of work. I think that as we are more prepared to use chatbots for medical care, for call centers, etc., then what do we do with those people who are out of work as a result is going to be a major piece of the post-COVID transformation. I was talking to Kai-Fu Lee, who's one of the co-chairmen of our Global AI Council the other day. The other co-chair is Brad Smith of Microsoft. And he was saying that he thinks that as we get used to social distancing, we will actually get more used to having AI-enabled robotics in our homes, in our offices, in our hospitals. So again, a symptom of how AI is going to be more attractive and more use, and we're going to be more likely to use it going forwards. And also education and AI. Most people are tearing their hair out as they try to use calls like this for education. How do we think about education, and how do we think about using AI? And as we experiment, we're using AI on our children, our most vulnerable citizens. What does that look like, and what are the governance structures that need to be in play there? So the forum really works on all of those types of situations. We're doing 20 different projects around the world at the moment, and one of them was the toolkit, which we're going to show you. But
I'm just going to open it up.
Sure, thank you. But just before I start talking about the toolkit, I just wanted to come back to one of the things that Carsten was saying, which was about training and making sure that everybody in your business understands the impact of AI for good and ill. So we have a project at the moment which we call the Tech Ethics Project, and there are significant players like Salesforce, who has a chief technology and humane use officer, and Microsoft has been effectively saying we need to teach everybody in the organization about ethics and AI. It's no use just teaching our tech people. We need to have this sort of complete approach. So if I could just ask you to go to this toolkit and go down a little bit to where you get the beehive effect there. Super. So what we did was we actually put the tech ethics piece at the middle, because if you get ethics wrong in some of your AI developments that involve human beings, so human-centered work, then you are going to have some really bad outcomes, and that could affect your bottom line as badly as it's affecting, hopefully, Eon's well, because they're doing it well. So it's really important that that all board members think about, okay, we can use AI, it can make us more profitable, but what are the downsides of doing so? And as you can see, we then had looked at it from the different oversight pieces of what the board needs to know. So if, for example, you sit on the audit committee of a board, you're going to want to look at those audit, risk and governance modules. Each module stands on its own. So you don't have to read the whole toolkit, but obviously we recommend that you do read the whole toolkit. And then also embedded within the toolkit are questions for boards to ask of the C-suite, and use cases, a way of saying, okay, we're a board, we want to learn more about AI, what do we need to know, and how do we need to get to this information? So allowing you to say, this is a template to use half of our board meeting or all of our board meeting to actually understand AI, whether we're using it. We had one fantastic example where we piloted it with a very large company, multinational company, and the board looked at the CEO and said, are we using AI? And so, it's sort of from as basic as that. So if I could just get you to go up to where it says modules, we can just open one of those modules.
Here we go.
There. Yes, so why don't we open competitive strategy, for example? So as I say, standalone module will give you everything you need to know about competitive strategy. And again, everything is broken down into the same pieces. So each module looks similar. If you just go up just a little, great. So at all of these modules, the contents, an introduction, examples for you. How is AI being used in the real world in competitive strategy aspects? Responsibilities. What are your responsibilities as a board or a company? What are your oversight requirements as a board member? An agenda, so that you can take this and say, we need to go to the board and we need to talk about this. Resources for you to read. And then at the end of the whole toolkit, there are these long questionnaires for you to be able to ask of yourself and of your C-suite. So I'll stop there. I've had more than my time. I apologize about that, but I hope it was helpful.
Someone is asking, can we share the link to toolkit? The answer to that, of course, is yes.
Of course.
What was your, just one quick question before we move on. What was your impression? The example you gave is of a board not knowing whether they're using AI. That sort of suggests they're pretty clueless. What was your impression of the general level among the kind of large companies you looked at of awareness and aptitude?
Well, before we did this piece of work, we did a fairly major survey of companies, from very large multinational companies to smaller companies. And the responses that we got back to that survey made us determined that we really had to provide this tool to boards, because the true paucity of understanding amongst board members.
Yes.
Yeah, let me jump on this question about whether companies are using AI and say something very controversial. Everybody's using AI for centuries now. It's called processes and rules, which are codified and in the business level, right? So you have a specific process to do something. It just happens that the processes are done by humans, but then who cares whether it's done by humans or not in many ways, right? The one type of AI, just to demystify those a little bit, is so-called expert systems, let's say rule-based AI. You have rules. Now, whether the rules are coded with software and the computer automatically decides when to send the product to the customer or when to close the order or whatever, or whether those rules are actually from a human who is following them to make decisions and interacting with somebody, who cares? Well, actually, we do care, because one is a scale issue and a speed issue and transparency issue and standardization issue and all that stuff. But I want to make sure companies and the audience is not scared of AI. It is as simple as starting from having some rules that you write by hand for different decisions that can be automated and standardized, and you potentially give them to somebody to code it in a database so that then they are automated. And that's already AI. From there, you can go further and make the decisions more intelligent by having AI do what's called the second type of AI, which is the most interesting one in some sense, the learning-based AI, where the human does not write the rules, but the computer learns the rules from data by observing how people interact, how customers behave, how everything behaves. Networks behave, machines behave, and the computer learns the rule. And we're talking mostly about the second type of AI today. But let's not forget the first type of AI, which is nothing more than human rules, which are automated. So in that sense, we've been using AI from our heads in many ways. Just
okay,
to help.
Carsten and Kaya, you both had a comment, so let's do them in that order.
Yeah, just to build on what Theo says, I think we need to be very clear about what is AI, what we're talking about, because there's a lot of myth out there, which I think stimulates unjustified anxiety and worries. It's very clear that everything we do has to be based on sound ethical principles. And there are lots of open questions, no question about that. But what Theo says, I think currently, most applications that are in use today is at the end of the day, a decision solving problem in an optimized way using statistical tools, using vast amounts of data that exceeds human capacity to process those and come to better forecasts, to better decisions. And clearly the technology, the algorithms that sit behind those can be at times opaque. So it's not always clear how this decision was made, but this this is what AI currently, in most cases, stands for: decision-making problems using a vast amount of data. What people always confuse is the cyborg scenario, that the machine will take over. We are still, to my knowledge, very far away from what makes us human. Let's take counterfactual thinking. So going into the imaginary space and thinking, what would have happened if the situation that has just happened would have happened differently? So we can operate the brain in imaginary spaces. And this is the next level, and there are further levels out there. We are not yet there, so we're talking about very important class of problems. They're very powerful techniques. You can do lots and lots of things with this, but they're decision-making based. They need clear rules, ethical behavior, but it's not like the machines are taking over.
Absolutely, I agree entirely with that. We don't need to necessarily worry about those problems, although there are people who do, and I thank them for it, because we actually have enough problems ourselves with the machine learning that we're doing at the moment. As Carsten said, you've got to make sure that you're making ethical decisions. And even if you don't want to make ethical decisions, even if you're a company that doesn't want to do it ethically, it's actually going to be sensible for you to do so. So Gartner recently put out a study that said by 2022, 85% of algorithms will be useless because we aren't dealing with bias in data. Now, that's bias that's there because we haven't got enough people who are not men creating our algorithms. And also, we haven't got enough people of minorities creating our algorithms, but also because our data is often poor. And so, let's not just think about this as an ethics problem. This is a true business problem for you as well.
Now, maybe we should move on to talk about, we're talking about governance. Maybe we should sort of talk about the hard rules, as in regulation, because that's where you end up if you don't solve governance issues, I suppose. Do you want to say, do you want to talk about this, Theos? Because this is I know you're plugged into some of these networks of policymakers.
Thanks, and I will say something that Kay and Carsten already touched upon and generalize from that. So I just here have a list of kind of usual suspects everybody talks about when it comes to ethical, responsible AI, let's call it responsible AI or AI ethics, and some challenges. Now, for the sake of being a little bit controversial, again, just to enjoy a little bit, all of us, some of those ethical goals may be just fantasy. Let me give you an example. I'm working, and these are also covering some projects I'm working on these days myself, quite a bit. Today, I was working, for example, in an article that we're working on with my collaborators from Harvard Law School about AI explainability and transparency. And one of the questions there is, can we really achieve it? To begin with, can people really explain what they are doing? So why do we expect machines to explain what they are doing? Second problem, here's another problem. Machines can give you explanations today based on some so-called AI explainability algorithms. There are a bunch of them out there, which are recent relatively, which give you like rule-based versions of black boxes or counterfactual explanations. So for example, counterfactual explanation is something like, let's say you are using an AI system for credit scoring, and the credit scoring system says you don't get credit. The question then is, okay, can you tell me what is the minimum number of changes in my profile that if I had those things different in my profile, I would have gotten credit? The minimum changes in the data, right, to change the decision. And all of those rules, all of those explanations that come out of the machines are, first of all, not necessarily causal. And second of all, they may not be intuitive. And here is a problem. If they are not intuitive, they may actually break the trust of the users in the machine. Either they break the trust of the users in the machine if they are not intuitive, in which case explainability, which is meant to increase trust, does exactly the opposite, or it can be even worse. Because they are not intuitive, some people will try to force a narrative on those explanations and fall in what's called narrative fallacy, meaning you make up a story as a user based on what the machine says, which can be totally misleading and actually can be dangerous. It can be it's much trickier than we think to do those things. Let me take a couple of other, and then I see the reaction, which is great. Accountability. Accountability, okay. My AI system is based on third-party data, and there is on one of the third-party data, there is like row number 5063 in Excel and column number 155. There is a funny number there, due to which my AI behaves funny. Do I really know this? Can we identify this? AI machines are probabilistic. They tell you with probability 75%, this customer will churn. Okay, how does the user perceive probabilities? Humans are terrible at the end of doing this. So there's epistemic risk. On fairness, there are two aspects here. One is so-called AI as a magnifying glass, which is what Kate touched upon. If a company has had biased hiring practices for years, and the data captured from the hiring practices of the companies over years basically reflect those biases, any machine learning that is trained on that data will simply magnify the biases that exist already in the organization. So in fact, it can be used as a tool to magnify the biases in the organization. Alternatively, it can also magnify biases further. For example, Kirsten mentioned about pricing, okay, or behavioral targeting, or recommendation systems, which we've had for 25 years now. And suddenly the world wakes up and says, oh my God, those recommendation systems may be discriminating because they show certain types of jobs to some people and not to others. They do price discrimination, which may leave out of the market some minorities. Whatever, right? They recommend products to you and not to me, and this may give me an advantage or you an advantage. There is so much unfairness happening because of the automation of decisions that we have not even started understanding this. So they can actually magnify those things. And then there are trade-offs. It's hard to get transparency and accuracy at the same time. It's just hard. I mean, you can have a transparent medical AI system that explains why it came to that conclusion, even though, as we said, this is potentially a fantasy. Or you can have a non-transparent medical AI system that can save your life. Choose. It's a classic example. Right? All to say, these are very difficult questions, and what I love about this topic is that it actually touches on philosophical questions. I call it philosophical engineering. We have to code, and at the World Economic Forum, you have something called the AI ethics switch. If I remember correctly, we were in a panel with Murat in Davos and Kai Fully and Brad Smith actually in February all together. And I remember Murat talked about this. So how do you codify ethics? How do you write software, or how do you let the machine write software by learning that actually captures those questions that humanity has been struggling with for thousands of years? This is fascinating to me, and that's what makes this topic really, really, really interesting in addition to everything else. I'll stop here for now.
Okay, I want to go first to Kay and then to Carsten for a reaction to that, and then we must take questions because I've got some really fantastic questions in the chat room. So Kay.
Okay, so two things. One, tech clash. We were beginning to see it in 2019. So getting this right is in our best interest. We don't want to lose the benefits of AI because we haven't dealt with this. And also just this survey from PwC. In 2019, they forecast that there would be 20% of global deployment of AI by business. They revised that forecast even before COVID, that there would only be in 2020, only 4%. And so, what's happening there? I think it's that companies are finding AI difficult to deploy, and they're worried about tech clash, and probably rightly so. And then the other piece is just, talked about regulation. We don't particularly believe regulation of AI is a good idea. And so just recently we worked and finished working and released with the UK government procurement guidelines for the UK government to use whenever they buy AI across the government. That's the equivalent of regulation, because it uses the buying power of the government to really think about these responsible AI challenges and make their suppliers think about it as well.
Carsten.
Yeah, Theos, I love your provocation, and I agree actually with many things. Well, there are two things I would push back a little bit on. The bias that is produced potentially based on the data that machines use may stem from the bias that we have producing the data in the first place. But could also be that the bias gets magnified to a level which still changes the bias even more so. And I think this is where the problem lies. the topic of intransparency of human decision making is true, but if I want to give feedback to deep neural nets that has learned how to optimize the parameters, etc., there's not much conversation happening. There's no feedback from me to the deep neural nets. It would just give the results and that's it. The fundamental difference, I think, is that we humans, when we make decisions, we can communicate. And because we are in our decision making so similar, how our brains work, we will find out more likely what the decision process is. So I wish that if this powerful tool of machine learning, artificial intelligence, it has embedded, if we could embed ethical principles, that it actually embeds it in a natural way. Why can't we actually, the technology, get the bias out of the system? Why can't it try to also even explain better the decision making than the humans can? I mean, but for that, of course, the ethics has to be embedded into the system. Of course, this, what I'm saying, is a dream, but it's meant to also push a little bit back. I think we have to work very hard on the transparency question. And the bias question that we all carry inside us is, I think, because we can't communicate with the machines that easily, carries a bigger risk, in my view.
There is something called ethics by design, which is very important. Sorry, Kay, I interrupted. I'm legal.
No, I was only saying thumbs up to Carsten. I agree.
All right, very good. Now we've got a few minutes. We've got still lots of stuff to cover, so I want to move on. And I've got a question here. I'll just pass on. It's in the chat room. It's a good question. Much of the data, maybe to Theos first. The data created. This data we're talking about is created by behavior of consumers. Do they benefit enough from AI? Do they receive their cut of the bigger pie or whatever based on their data at the moment?
Oh, that's a long question, which is who owns the data? Do you own the data, and do you get your benefit? Well, hard to start from somewhere, and I'll probably get some help from Kay and Carsten on this. Let me just say one point, which is, do we get better deals online? Let's take online, right? Take an example. Do we get better deals, meaning better supply and demand matching? That's what they are doing, right? This online algorithms, for example, they do supply and demand matching effectively, right? Do we get better supply and demand matching, satisfying our needs or discovering new needs or creating new needs, if you like, now than before? I say the answer, and there's lots of research on this, and which shows that the answer is, of course, yes, right? Having said this, do we really get all the benefits out of our personal data? Hard to tell. There is another way to see this, which is part of the discussion around privacy, from at least what I remember. I haven't worked on this myself, which is an argument that people are willing to give their data and part of their privacy in exchange for something that has tangible value for them. So it's doable, basically, but happy to get some more from there.
Okay.
Just to say two things. One, we've been long talking about monetization of data, and my colleague Sheila Warren, who runs data policy at the forum, is actually working on something that we call data for common purpose. And one of those elements is, should we get paid for the data that we provide? That's certainly a topic that the Japanese government has been thinking about for a long time. The difficulty about it is that, if you are poor, you are probably more likely to want to get paid for your data than if you're rich. And so then are we simply exacerbating some of the problems between the poor and the rich in our societies?
Carsten.
Yeah. I just want to say it's actually a great question, and I don't think there is an easy answer to it. I think what comes to my mind is we have to be incredibly critical of the applications we use and ask ourselves, actually, am I getting the right benefit from it, or am I getting screwed over a little bit? So if my app in the morning tells me there's a traffic jam, but it knows when I want to arrive and it wakes me up early, I think I get good service. Or my sleeping app actually has helped me to improve my sleep by being more mindful and doing things before sleeping, and it uses my data. Actually, I like it. But if I start buying stuff like books or read things in the news that makes me single-minded and directs me into the wrong direction, that's a bad thing. And I think it requires us to be more conscious about the applications. So it's a great question.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly come back to the children. So whether you monetize children's data, so are you going to sell the data that you're learning about children as you educate them to other people? That is actually a major area that nobody's actually working on at the moment. And we're doing something with UNICEF that's just beginning to touch the corners of that. But, you know, it may be that we want to put in some data protection for our children. That is very different. There's in America, for example, you're allowed to keep data if you call it educational data.
All right. I've got one question. This is a question for Carsten. I like this question. In your organization, for AI maintenance, how do you convince engineers that have been repairing an asset for 20 years to give up their judgment and trust in AI?
Well, first thing is they have to be part of the process in these projects because we need their expertise. And we have to demonstrate, or the algorithm has to demonstrate, that the algorithm comes to a better result than they do. Secondly, they actually don't lose their job, they have to change their job. And that means they also learn something. But if their input is being used to produce something better, that's also actually what it really happens at the end of the day. This works, but of course it requires leadership. It's also helping people to take away the fear, because it's any change in an organization, if with machine or not, if you want to change, can be perceived as criticism of what people did in the past. And this is, I think, a general thing where this is about leadership, how an organization learns to do things in a natural way. And in the same way, it's here. It's not about the algorithm is better than you. You can do a better job with the results. In order to get there, we need you. That's the kind of recipe.
Yes, yes.
To add two words, augmented jobs and trust are two very important words. I fully agree with Carsten on those.
Okay.
And also thinking about how you repurpose staff. So if you are, likely to make them redundant because you're using an algorithm that's doing the job, what can you repurpose them to do within your organization? And I think that a lot of organizations are really understanding that it might be that if they've got this skill set, they can be repurposed here really easily. And really thinking through that, rather than making them redundant and then hiring somebody else to do this job over here, that actually you could just transition to.
Okay, I've got one relevant. This is about, it's about teamwork. In the tech industry, we have seen success in pairing human-centered designers and researchers with AI and ML development teams to help reduce bias and increase inclusivity. Do you have any experience? It's a complicated question. Do you have any experience or comments with that?
I can start on this. Actually, we just published an article last week in Harvard Business Review exactly about this. Not about designers, but in general how to augment jobs, and happy to share this afterwards with other documents. I have experience with on other creative jobs, for example, on portfolio managers in investment. So how can you augment, which is also very creative, how can you augment their job using data, AI, machine learning? For example, I'll give you two examples. A, help them filter through lots of information. B, experiment. C, monitor their behavior. D, give them feedback about their behavior. For example, in the past month, it's a little bit like the Fitbit or whatever, the health applications or sports applications that we're having, but now it's for your behavior. So we imagine capturing every single data point that you've been about your behavior as a portfolio manager or as a salesperson or whatever, and analyzing this data, showing you every month, based on your behavior in the past month, you seem to be more risk averse than usual, or you seem to be overconfident when you buy a stock the second time, or you seem to enter too slowly in your position and you leave money on the table. You name it, right? So the data can capture this. So, and then of course there's a lot of in R&D and lots of the drug discovery nowadays for COVID is supported by, which is R&D, right, for drug, is supported by AI and computational biology kind of thing, to find combinations between drugs that are already approved. Machines are much better than humans in combinatorics. So that can be a huge source of innovation. Comes from combinations most of the time, probably, right? Just some examples.
Kay, you wanted to follow up on that?
Yeah, I did, because as I mentioned in my outline at the beginning, we have a project around tech ethics, which is about helping to understand how you put the right people together in teams, and how you support the AI scientists, and how you support the other members of your company to work together to create the right results. Ila Norbakash at Carnegie Mellon has developed a fantastic way of teaching his AI students, where he pairs them with humanities students. So as we can't, unfortunately, as Carsten says, put ethics into AI yet, we can get them working together from the very earliest time. And that's really important, because then we can learn from one another.
Okay, now we've got a little, I don't know if we've got time to talk about this. Do you want to, it's important, no. Carsten, maybe this came up again and again, actually, in questions submitted about skills. Maybe we should finish on this very quickly. What is a skillful AI professional these days, or someone who would be on this call? What level of skill do they need to aspire to?
I'm just going to point out two things. First of all, for senior executives, it's what I have there, the understanding the art of possible, understanding what is possible with AI, and not overhyped, but also knowing what's possible. That's a key skill. You have to develop a gut feeling for this through osmosis with knowledge and people around you, right? And the other thing is art and science. This is not science. This is not art. It's art and science. It's called, before AI, we had data science. The whole thing was the art and science of data science, the art and science of AI. Finally, it's hard to stop talking about this. There's a lot about what Kay said. It's about opportunities and understanding also risks. So there must be some skills around following the regulation, following the AI ethics kind of questions, following the risks from AI. There are so many talk about this here, and again, we can share some documents and some work afterwards.
Carsten.
Yeah, I think this is a blend of mix to be successful, to be honest. It starts clearly, you need technical skills in computer science and mathematics. You need just the skills. I would also say more than ever, values, a good empathy, a good understanding of human behavior is more critical than ever. What you also need, especially from a leadership perspective, people with a good understanding of business models. And how do you change an industry and a business model based on a data model? Meaning, imagine you could make all the decisions possible through sensors, collecting data and using the best algorithm to make better decisions. How would you design your business? Which businesses would emerge? Where are the competitive advantages? This is an abstract skill, applying the possibility in the context of business. An engineer would not necessarily think that way. And that's why I think the skill is to bring people with different qualities and skills together. And one important skill is indeed to be able to collaborate and work together, and leaving the ego sometimes at home.
Okay, I think you get the final word, Kay, because we're taking 3 more minutes because we gave 3 to Peter at the beginning, but talk to us about skills and then I think we'll close.
Sure. So first of all, let me echo what our previous speakers have said on this topic, because it's absolutely vital. I think, 2 things. First of all, some companies like Nokia and PwC have designed courses for that everybody goes on around AI. And that's a good way of helping people to understand AI, and everybody in the company to understand, but also understand that it's not necessarily going to take your job, or for you to understand what AI is as well, which is just important for the responsibility piece. And then I think the other piece of this, every company will be an AI company post-COVID. I don't think companies will survive if they don't adopt AI in some way post-COVID. And so it's really important that you begin to educate yourself. And if you do have a maths background, then there are plenty of courses like on Coursera or Fast AI that you can actually take and understand, and it'll give you a little bit more opportunity to ask the right questions of your AI scientists.
And the INSEAD, you forgot to say.
But look, let me just say, there's a
INSEAD.
feedback survey, please fill it in. Theos, close up for us about the big picture of what we're saying, and then we'll finish.
Well, I mean, I had a slide earlier on, which maybe you want to go back to, which I always like to close with, which is that this topic requires this topic requires kind of a very diverse approach. We have to think about values and principles and ethics and philosophy. We think about regulation and corporate governance and board level decisions and risks. We think about industry transformation, what we see in the Aeon and energy sector that we saw from Kirsten and the Aeon journey and story. Talk about organizational change and process change and cultural change. About project management, which is not really projects. These AI projects are very different. I had a point before about project versus startup. These are entrepreneurial, exactly what Kirsten said earlier on. But the thing also about the technical skills that range from data engineering, totally different thing, to analytics and machine learning and data science, which is very creative, and people who are translators. And of course, the IT infrastructure is always there. So this shows that we have to put together things from databases to statistics to business models and industry transformation to philosophy. And I cannot emphasize enough the importance of having this kind of multidimensional, holistic, collaborative, as we said before, as Kay mentioned before, approach to AI for solving lots of big problems like the energy one that we've seen from Aeon. Finally, thank you from my side to Kay and Karsten for this wonderful participation, and to you, Neil, for helping us organize this well.
Thank you so much, everyone. Lots of links, lots of articles, brilliant case study toolkit, all coming by email. Thank you for brilliant questions. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.